Gary said, "Could you explain to one who's never seen an Ingmar Bergman film, namely me, what it was in his passing that brought you to tears?" Well, yes, this morning I was starting to look at the news on my computer, and one of the first things I saw was that Ingmar Bergman had died, and I immediately burst into tears. I mean, like sobbing out loud. I had to get up and get tissues, and then I went back and wrote the post, and then I thought about it again. It made me cry a second and a third time thinking about it. Now, why would that make me cry? I'm not crying because an 89-year-old man has died. It's not like, oh, it's terrible that he died. It's not like when someone young dies. It was just the recognition that he was a great artist, that he was one of the great artists of the time that I've been alive. He meant a lot to me. And when he dies, that means that's the end of him. That's everything that he was. And so there's a kind of a recognition that that was greatness, that was a man, that was the totality of what he was. We now know the end point. And it's just a recognition of greatness. I cry at beauty and art. So I you know from an old blog post that I once cried because of a beautiful tree. So I think that I like to have the emotional open channel to be able to cry at art. So it's not like, oh, please, let's force myself to cry over this because I want to be the kind of person that cries over art. It wasn't like that at all. It was really almost absurd. I mean, I actually just broke down and cried. And I'm sharing this with you. So that sometime when I get emotional over something that you think is, crazy to be emotional over it, I want it to be on record that I have regularly cried about certain sorts of things so that you'll understand me. But basically it's the idea of greatness, the great artist. And could you convince me of why, and give me a particular film that I should see before I too pass on? Well, I would recommend that you see, I would say, see Scenes from a Marriage. See Cries and Whispers. I would recommend those two. And see Persona. Persona is also very good. Reader I Am said, "Did you instantly know that My Dinner with Andre was destined to be one of your favorite movies, if not your favorite, or did it more grow on you?" Yes, My Dinner with Andre was a movie that completely won me. I mean, there's one rival movie where the exact same thing happened. I went to the movie alone one day, saw it, was so excited by it that I went back the next day and brought other people. And that's happened with two movies, and one was My Dinner with Andre, the other was Aguirre, The Wrath of God, which is also a Werner Herzog movie that I've also at times called my favorite movie. But over the years I've settled more in with My Dinner with Andre because I've just watched it many more times. I've watched Aguirre, The Wrath of God many times too. If I want to watch Floating Down a River, I watch Aguirre, The Wrath of God. If I want to watch two guys eating dinner and talking, I watch My Dinner with Andre. My Dinner with Andre, first of all, I just love the fact that they just sit there and talk, and that it's interesting with such a minimal setting. But also just the content of it is exactly the thing I love to get involved in the most, which is art and life, and the relationship between art and life. When I talked about the Ingmar Bergman movies, in my Ingmar Bergman post today, when I talked about the Ingmar Bergman movies that meant a lot to me, that I do them in reverse chronological order because I took the list from IMDb. The first one is Autumn Sonata. That's the most recent Ingmar Bergman movie that I've seen, and that is a movie in which Ingrid Bergman plays a concert pianist, and her daughter is played by Liv Ullmann, and then the mother comes to visit the daughter, and basically it's all about the relationship between the mother and the daughter. And I'm not really big on movies that are just about some family relationship that's all fraught with angst and everything. I ordinarily avoid movies like that, actually. But this one, because it's about art. In fact, I avoided that movie too. And the only reason I actually did watch it was because they talk about it in My Dinner with Andre. And they talk about how, I think Andre talks about going to see that movie. And after he gets out of the movie, he just breaks down and cries uncontrollably. And it's because of this line in the movie that Ingmar Bergman says, "I could always live in my art, but never in my life." And, Andre has that feeling too, that his art becomes so important to him, and he realizes he can't live in his life. So there's this idea of art and life, and the personal kind of emotional struggle over art and life. And that's what Andre and Wally are talking about through the movie My Dinner with Andre. And they talk about this Ingmar Bergman movie. And notice they talk about this idea of crying in response to art. Of course, it means a lot to his personal story, this idea of living in your art and not living in your life. I've sometimes cried at, have you ever seen a movie and then after the movie you talk about it with the person you saw it with and you just break down and cry unconsolably? You almost didn't even realize how deeply the movie moved you until you start to talk about it and it hits the point that really touched you, and then you just break down and cry. That's happened to me as I can remember it. I might cry on camera now. I'm actually going to try not to. I'm not going to ham it up and try to cry over this, but there's two examples that I can think of where that happened to me, and one was Lolita, the Kubrick movie based on the Nabokov book. We were talking about it, and just the idea that he really loved her touched me so much that I just broke down and started crying as we were walking home. That was when I was a college student. And the other time I remember that happened was Life is Beautiful, the Roberto Benigni movie that was about a man and his son in a concentration camp. And the idea that made me break down and cry was when it was just the final statement, "This is what my father did for me." If you know the movie, you know what that refers to. Anyway, so the idea of crying over art and the emotions attached to art, maybe you feel more emotion over art than over life. And if you think that you do you think that that's wrong? Maybe that is wrong. Maybe you should be more emotional over the actual personal relationships that you have than your response to art. H.D. House said, Bach, Haydn, Beethoven, Ravel, or Stravinsky? I would say Beethoven. Alan S. said, your thoughts on surveillance cameras? Well, I think if they're in public, I kind of think they're a good idea. We're already being seen in public, and I think they would tend to deter crime, or at least to convict criminals. So I think I kind of like them. Not in my house. Don't send them into my house. I am afraid that they're going to develop little robots with cameras. Like they'll be just like little insects, or they might not be distinguishable from insects. And the government will, be able to control them like drones, and they'll fly into your house and they'll watch you, and you won't know that it's not a fly. And then someday maybe you'll think, how come there's always a fly in the house? How come it never dies? And you'll go over and you'll look at it really closely, and there'll be something. Okay. Anyway, someday you'll see. You go over and you look at that fly, and you'll look at it a little closely, and you'll realize that's not a real fly. That's a robot. That's a drone. That's a little camera. How long has it been here? Maybe that fly is already in the house. Keep track of your flies. Keep track of your spiders.